Well, last week we started a new series called Open for Business, and I didn't do a great job of kind of opening and telling you what that was all about. But if you've ever been somewhere that is starting a new business and has a grand opening kind of a thing, they don't just put up a sign that says Open for Business, do they? Do they? No, they don't do that. You know what they do is they go out and they do all their advertising. They train their employees and to be able to provide the service that they're looking to provide. They do everything that they can possibly do to make sure that business is a success. And in some respects, what they're doing is they're outreaching to the community. They're outreaching to their demographic. They're outreaching to different people. And that doesn't just happen by putting up a sign. That doesn't even just happen by having the greatest product ever. You know, you can have the greatest product ever and nobody would know about it. You know, if you didn't do your part in presenting that product to the rest of the community. And so the church is kind of the same thing. I happen to believe that the church, especially the Church of the Nazarene in Broken Arrow, has the greatest product on the face of the planet. And the thing is, we didn't have anything to do with it. We didn't create that product. We didn't have to do any demographic studies to make sure that people could accept that product. The product has always been, it always will be, and it has the potential to change our world, not just us individually, but our world for the better. And so, if that's true, and we have the best product, and we're open for business as the church, then isn't it just natural that we would reach our community? Okay, one person said yes. Isn't it just natural that we would reach our community? Okay, 3 people said yes. Isn't it just natural that we would outreach our community? Yes. Okay. That was the same 3 people that did it louder. No, I'm just kidding. Good job. Outreach is important. It's part of who we are as the church, not just Broken Arrow Church of the Nazarene, but the entire church universal. Going out and making a difference in the lives of people. And last week we heard a story from one of our staff people, Eric, about a guy by the name of Jeremy that invested in his life, even when maybe some people didn't know that he was going through some stuff. And maybe even Jeremy didn't know that he was going through things. And he invested in him, and he gave himself to him. And as a result, what happened was we have a pretty good youth pastor. We have a pretty good minister of the gospel when he preaches. And he's been effective in reaching people. And he's reached out to people. But what if Jeremy gave up? What you're going to hear over the next few weeks is we have another testimony for you this morning. Is you're going to hear from the people that lead you. Testimonies about how people change their life and touch them. And I think James has something to share with you about a testimony about how some people have made an impact on his life.
I'm not necessarily used to coming up here and speaking without a guitar in my hands, so if I look like I don't know what to do with my hands, that's why. You guys probably, most of you in this room, I'm guessing that you've known me for a while. If you don't, my name is James. I am the worship pastor here. And my testimony begins as a child when I accepted Christ as a child at a very early age. And I grew up in this church. I was raised by our children's department, and many of you served as volunteers in many of those areas as my Sunday school teachers and my children's church volunteers and my quizzing instructors. And I am certainly grateful for the foundation in my faith that I received from this church. I'm also thankful for a mom that made me come to church whenever the doors were open, whether I felt like I wanted to or not. She was my first mentor and is still my mentor, and she's a great lady, and you guys should all get to know her better. When I was a teenager, though, I continued to grow as people took an interest in me. And that was youth sponsors who put up with me even when I was getting into trouble and being mischievous. And they encouraged me not just to attend church, but to begin to be a leader within our youth group. Now, music has been an interest of mine for as long as I can remember. I remember drumming on things as a kid and irritating people probably to no end. But youth group was where I really learned a love of worship music. We used to sing Dennis Jernigan songs through this little 1980s boombox, and John Winter's nodding his head. The good old days of 20 or 30 kids standing around a little boombox singing old Dennis Jernigan songs. And I remember attending a few of his nights of worship that really left him an impression on me. This idea that you could just do nothing but sing songs all night. He didn't preach. He didn't do any of the other stuff that goes along with having a church service. He just sang songs, and we worshiped all night. And that really made a big impression on me. Another way that I was affected as a teenager was that we got to have Mercy Me come to our camps. And they would lead us in worship, and I really learned a lot about what musical worship could look like from them. And I remember Bart saying that what they were doing was setting the table for the Feast of the Word. And that's always stuck with me, and that's something I hope to do every week as I lead worship. So anyway, we got all these great ideas from seeing people play music, and particularly from watching Mercy Me, and we started playing songs live in our youth group when I was pretty new to the youth group. And I'm positive we were not good at the time. I think I might have known 3 chords, just barely. But we had a lot of fun playing together. We enjoyed worshiping together, and it was a really good reason to begin learning an instrument. Rather than just going home and thinking, yeah, I'd like to play guitar, it was like, well, now I've got something to practice for. During that time growing up, my good friend Nathan Miller really took me under his wing, and he started to teach me about worship and about ministry. And he really took a genuine interest in me and my spiritual well-being. Sometimes I marvel at the things that Nathan did to make sure that I was a part of things. He picked me up in his car and would drive me all over town and have me over to his house, and just spent countless hours and who knows how many dollars, hanging out with this kid that he, really had no other reason than just we like to worship together. And I am definitely forever grateful for his friendship. Nathan and I in our youth group band, we began to have opportunities to lead worship not just at the church, but at district events and retreats, and for some other groups as well. And those were really great and memorable times for me. Great opportunities to lead other people outside of my own local context in worship. When Nathan left for college, I started leading the youth band sort of by default. And I started to grow closer to my youth pastor, Larry Page. Larry let me hang around this church more than he probably should have, and more than maybe my parents would have even liked at the time. But he just let me come up and after school hang out in his office and talk to him and see what he was doing. He gave me a lot of leeway, and he really, honestly, let me lead. Anything from planning music for our youth services, which he just basically let me go on. to being a part of the youth council, to planning events, and really allowing me to be a partner in ministry to him, to our youth. I'm still to this day not sure why he did that. I, never feel deserving of the faith that he puts in me, but I'm certainly glad that he did. So our youth band continued to have opportunities to lead worship at other camps and retreats, and even for groups outside our denomination. And at one of those retreats, I really felt God asking me not just to say, hey, I'm saved, but to really give my everything to him through entire sanctification. And then at NYC in Toronto in 1999, I felt God speaking to me this time about pursuing a lifelong call to ministry. And at the time, because I was so close to Larry and because my concept of a worship pastor was this guy who played piano and led a choir and those things I wasn't really interested in, I felt like God was calling me to youth pastoring. And so Nathan and Larry both really encouraged me to attend Southern Nazarene University and to further my ministerial education. So after a struggle in convincing my dad that was a good idea, I left for SNU, and I didn't really know what to expect. Honestly, I think I had been on SNU's campus one time before I showed up for school, and I really went solely on the recommendation of Larry and Nathan. And my time at SNU was kind of rough. I started out in a difficult living situation with two guys that they didn't get along, and I was sort of stuck in the middle in this cramped room up in the 5th floor of Snowbarger. And so that was difficult. I didn't really want to connect with either of them because they didn't like each other, and so I figured if I was friends with one, then the other one probably wouldn't like me. So, and my freshman year, Larry Page left for Wichita, and I just really struggled to make connections or deep friendships at SNU, and started to feel less and less connected to my church here at home, and more isolated. Now, I was serving in churches the entire time I was at SNU, but not maybe in healthy ways. And I started to get really burned out on just the constant grind of every Sunday and Wednesday going and serving in a church and going to chapel 3 times a week at SNU. And I just was burnt out on ministry, and I started to feel really distant from God. I felt like I had prayed and prayed, but that my prayers weren't going higher than the ceiling, that it didn't seem like God was listening. And then as a result, my personal life was a mess. And I went through a tough breakup, and I had to step down from leadership in a on-campus ministry group because I felt like my mental health was in jeopardy at the time. I spent a lot of time at college in my room alone, practicing guitar and out playing drums with groups, but not for the purpose of leading worship. I was really maybe wanting to be a rock star or something at the time. I don't know. So I was playing different instruments with bands and going to shows in Tulsa and Oklahoma City and clubs and bars. And by the time I graduated, I really didn't want anything to do with ministry, and I didn't really want anything to do with God. And so when I graduated and came home here to Broken Arrow, I got a job that I really just ended up hating. And I came to church sporadically, and it was sometimes just because I knew my mom would get on to me if I wasn't here. I wasn't really interested in church, and I felt like church had nothing to offer me because I had this theological education and I knew all the answers. So I quit my job with no plan in place for a new job, and I just felt kind of aimless. I always thought about this call to ministry that I knew it was real from NYC, but I was dismissing it because I felt so distant from God at the time. One week, as I was sitting in church, I was listening to Larry Morris preach, and I couldn't tell you to this day what he was talking about But I know that I finally felt God speak to me again. And so I went to the altar that day, and Pastor Larry prayed with me, and he stayed following service to talk to me. And I told him about feeling lost and hopeless, but still remembering this call to ministry. And he started to take an interest in helping me return to God and to the church and to ministry. And so I started to play in the band again under John Teal and to help in the youth group under Kevin Johnson. And those guys gave me opportunities to kind of plug back in. Larry Morris mentored me and gave me opportunities and ultimately a job here at the church as an administrative assistant. And I'm certainly grateful for that. What was great about that job was that I started to learn what full-time ministry really looked like. Like, before I started working at a church, I couldn't have told you, like, hey, how does a pastor spend all these hours a day? Like, what are they doing all this time? They just get up and preach or play some songs on Sunday. And even after going through 4 years of college, I couldn't have told you what a pastor was doing for 40 or 50 or 60 hours a week. So I got to see that. And I got some opportunities to lead worship and to preach to the youth on occasion. And I really felt like God was renewing my call to ministry, but He had helped me to understand that what I really loved and felt called to was leading others into the presence of God through music. And when John Teal left, I felt like it was a good time for me to pursue my own career in worship ministry, so I started polishing up my resume, and I can say I never expected to begin my ministry here at Broken Arrow, but Larry Morris offered me the position, and I really felt God telling me He wanted me here. And I know it hasn't been an easy road for the last 5 years, but I'm glad that I stayed. And I never would have expected what God had in store for me here. But I'm thankful for the experiences that I've had and all that I've learned, and for the people that God's brought into my life. I'm thankful for the time I got to spend with Ken Pell, who mentored me, and for all he taught me about ministry and for his mentorship. And I'm thankful for Pastor Scott and his heart for seeing this church accomplish greater things. Guys, I wouldn't be here if I didn't feel like this church had great potential. And best of all, I got to know my wife. And now my baby gets to grow up at the same church that I did. And I'm happy about those things. But I also acknowledge that I wouldn't be where I am today if a few people hadn't taken an interest in me. If Nathan Miller hadn't spent all that time with me. If Larry Page hadn't let me hang around here, if Larry Morris hadn't seen me and the need that I had at the time. They saw something in me, and they were faithful to follow God's leading to invest in my life. And I would just encourage you that there are people all around you that need someone to invest in them. You don't have to spend 24 hours a day with them. You don't have to take on all of their troubles and all of their problems. But this is something that you can do regardless of what age you are, whether you're a teen or whether you're a middle-aged adult or whether you're 90 years old. You can invest in somebody else's life, and you can do that intentionally. It's my hope that one day there's going to be some kid that's talking about how Pastor James invested in his life or her life. I hope that's your prayer too. Thank you for listening, and back to Scott.
Aren't you glad you didn't give up on it? Aren't you glad that when you saw that little beardless guy running around when he was a little kid, That you didn't just throw up your hands and say, oh man, he's never going to amount to anything, he's never going to accomplish anything, or he's going to end up in jail or whatever because of whatever he did or didn't do in your life, those kinds of things. I don't know if it was ever that bad. I've heard stories. But the reason that James is able to grow, the reason that people like Eric grow, the reason that I've been able to grow has very little to do with who we are as individuals, and has so much to do with people who understand what it is that they're supposed to be about. Churches that understand that their job is to reach into the lives of people who are hurting, or to reach into the lives of people who are less experienced, to reach into the lives of people who are confused and struggling, and saying, you know what, no matter how messed up you are, no matter what you don't understand, no matter what it is that you do that bothers me to no end, I'm going to wrap my arms around you and I'm going to love you, because at the end of the day, you are more important than me. In essence, what they've done is they've opened up their hearts to people, just like Jesus has opened up his heart to you and I. You see, the one thing that I'm convinced of is this, is that open hearts lead to open invitations. You see, when we're open, when our hearts are open to people that are not like us, when our hearts are open to people that are very, very, very different than us, when our hearts are open to those people, then they begin to invite us into their lives. And the same thing was true when you accepted Jesus. See, Jesus' heart was open to you. He was open to you from the very beginning, and as his heart was open to you, then what did that invite? That invited invitation. Knowing that there was nothing that you have done or that you were going to do that was going to be a surprise to him. And I think if all of us look back to that time in our life when we accepted Jesus as our Savior, we could point to somebody that had an open heart. We could point to somebody that had a key part in our story. And maybe some of us still have those people in our lives that we connect with and talk to on a regular basis. And that's so important for us. But see, unfortunately, we live in a day where the longer that we are Christians and the longer that we accept this gift of grace, the easier it is for us to forget that we're called to the same thing that those people in our lives were called to have an open heart. You see, Paul, in the passage we're going to go through quickly this morning, in the passage we're going to look at in 2 Corinthians chapter 6. The Corinthians, before I start reading it, they were a problem bunch. I mean, they were such a problem, he had to write 2 letters. 1 Corinthians and 2 Corinthians. And 1 Corinthians, they were a problem. He was talking about divisions. He was talking about people were getting confused what spiritual gifts were and what spiritual fruit was. And people were getting all mixed up in 1 Corinthians. And so he writes this letter and he spends time with them. And see, this is a church that Paul had planted in Corinth, and so they saw him as his pastor, but they even got to the place in 1 Corinthians where they were questioning Paul and his ability or his credentials even to teach. And so he writes that first letter in 1 Corinthians, and then he goes to 2 Corinthians. And as we're getting ready to read this, if you read the first 2 chapters, the biggest thing that the Corinthians were upset with Paul on was that he didn't come straight from Ephesus to Corinth. Paul said, hey, I'm going to come and I'm going to visit you. And he was in Ephesus when he did that. But when he started his journey to go to Corinth, God called him to Macedonia. And so it took him a long time to get to Corinth. And the people understood and they prayed for him so that he would have a good ministry in Macedonia. No. They were ticked. They said, you said you were coming here, but you went to Macedonia. We don't care about Macedonia. Those people over there don't even know Jesus. You planted a church here. We're your responsibility. Get over here. If you really cared about us, you'd be here, and you wouldn't be wanting to go to other places, and you wouldn't be focusing on other people. We're your church. You planted us. We own you. Maybe they didn't go that far, but there sure was a sense of entitlement. And so in the first 2 chapters of 2 Corinthians, Paul deals with some of that, of why he did what he was supposed to do. And then we move here to chapter 6. And he begins to talk to them a little bit about the importance of making sure that they have an open heart. And before we get into it again, this isn't a shaking finger in the face of the Corinthians. This is a personal plea from Paul. And it starts off this way. As God's partners, we beg you not to accept this marvelous gift of God's kindness and ignore it. And so right off the bat, he's saying, hey, I want to make sure, I'm begging you, when we planted this church and you accepted Christ, and some of you accepted Christ and this was a real thing that happened, but you haven't really done much with your salvation since that day. And so he starts off begging, please, 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 don't ignore what God's done in your life. And then he quotes from Isaiah, for God says at the right time, I heard you on the day of salvation, and I helped you. Indeed, the right time is now. Today is the day of salvation. You see, we could stop here. I want to run through the rest of it. We could stop here and spend a lot of time, because what Paul is doing is he's saying, you know what, in the time that you needed God the most, he was there. In the time where you were at your wit's end and you said, I've tried everything else. I've done everything I can do to live this life and to be righteous. And I've realized that I can't do it on my own. And you said, Lord, here I am. Save me from myself. He did it. And sometimes when we read this, we interpret it as saying, well, does that mean that sometimes when we call out to God, we're not ready? Is there a time that's better for us to accept Christ than other times? And Paul said, no, today is the day of salvation. You see, God's ready every second to extend salvation to you. The only thing that makes it the right time is the time when we're ready to accept him. When we're ready to admit that maybe we don't know everything that there is to know, that maybe that we don't think that accepting Christ is about everything happening perfectly right and easy. But today is the day of salvation. He's saying, I beg you, don't ignore it. And so how do you not ignore it? He goes on, he says, we live in such a way that no one will stumble because of us, and that no one will find fault in our ministry. In other words, if we really are focused on not ignoring God's kindness to us, we need to live in such a way that no one will stumble because of us, and no one will find fault with our ministry. In other words, I got to make a choice every single day that I'm going to follow Jesus. That I'm not just going to take the words that I heard and be glad because I'm saved. I'm not just going to take the words that I heard and say, you know what, that's fine, that's wonderful. Well, I'm glad I'm going to heaven, and I'm glad I'm around other people that love Jesus as much as I do. He says you're going to have to live your life in such a way that people don't stumble. That means you can't be a hypocrite. That means you can't be one way at church and be another way when you go outside the four walls of the church. It means you gotta actually allow the Holy Spirit to do something in you. And then not only that, you need to do things that keep people from finding fault with your ministry. And then he goes on to say, he says, in everything that we do, we show that we are true ministers of God. We patiently endure troubles and hardships and calamities of every kind. We have been beaten. We have been put into prison. We have faced angry mobs, worked to exhaustion, endured sleepless nights, and gone without food. In other words, it's not easy. We've lived life. Life happens. And then it goes on. We prove ourselves by our purity, our understanding, our patience, our kindness, by the Holy Spirit within us, by our sincere love. We faithfully preach the truth. In other words, I'm not keeping score of how many people I lead to Jesus. It's important to me, but it's also important that I love people. They're not just a number. And then he goes on to say God's power is working in us. We use the weapons of righteousness in the right hand for attack and in the left hand for defense. We serve God whether people honor us or despise us, whether they slander us or praise us. We are honest, but they call us impostors. We are ignored even though we are well known. We live close to death, but we are still alive. We have been beaten, but we have not been killed. Our hearts ache, but we always have joy. We are poor, but we give spiritual riches to others. We own nothing, and yet we have everything. And then, as close to a finger wagging as he gets, he says, "Oh, dear Corinthians, friends, we have spoken honestly with you, and our heart is open to you. There is no lack of love on our part, but you have withheld your love from us." I should think about that for a moment. Everything that Paul's talking about so far, isn't it? It's, hey, we're doing our best. We're following the calling that God has given us. We love you even though you question me, even though you don't think that I'm doing the right thing, even though you think that I should have come straight from Ephesus to Corinth. We love you. But guys, and this is hard, you don't love us. I just want you for a moment to put yourselves in the shoes of the Corinthians. The first pastor of your church, he planted it, he led you, he taught you, and then he left you. He told you all along that was going to happen. He didn't lead you to believe that he was going to be there forever. He's Paul. He's a missionary. That's his job. He's supposed to go from place to place. He said, I'm going to teach you, but I'm not supposed to do all the work for you. I love you. I'm going to help you. I'm going to do whatever I can for you. And then he left. And then when they were in need, they called him, and he came back. And all of a sudden, he wasn't what they thought he was. And then he moves on. I'm asking you, I'm begging you to respond as if you were my own children. Open your hearts to us. You see, I don't know if you picked up on it or not. I've been pushing pretty hard. But this passage is a personal, passionate plea from Paul. He's begging the Corinthians to be as open to him as he's been to them. He's asking them to trust him as if they were his own children. It's not a passage of you should or a passage of you ought. It's Paul communicating from a broken heart. And he's begging them, don't ignore the salvation that you've received. He's begging them, don't get so focused on yourself that you forget that it's not about you. It's about Jesus. You see, at the end of the day, it's not even about other people. It's about Jesus. And for the believer that's opened their heart to Jesus and accepted that invitation to walk in the light of God, and the person who's focused on who Jesus is and has an open heart to him, then will naturally have an open heart to everyone else. See, I have to believe that if Paul were alive today, when he looked at the church universal, he would probably be preaching the same message. I'm begging you, church, don't ignore the salvation that you've received. Don't just think that it's good enough to say a sinner's prayer and then live like you want to live the rest of your life. Don't believe that a prayer makes everything all right. Don't believe for a second that it is okay for you to, in church, sing songs of praise or talk to your neighbors about how much you love Jesus because it's easy there. They all love Jesus. And then go out and not connect with a lost and dying world. He's saying if you're open for business, how's business? I got to think that if Paul were still alive, he'd be begging us to open our hearts. He'd be begging us to move in the lives of people. And if we're going to do what God's called us to do, if we're going to be a people that want God's blessing, so we have to open our hearts to others. And sometimes the people that we have to open our hearts to are not even total strangers. There's some of us who've closed our heart to the people that are closest to us. Not because we don't love them. It's not because we're rotten people. The truth of the matter is that's just the philosophy of the world. If I don't get what I want from you, I'm not wasting my time with you. I've even heard preachers preach it. I've even heard preachers say things like, you know what, you give them once, you give them twice, 3 times, and then, hey, you move on. The only problem with that is I don't see anywhere in Scripture where God gives me permission to close my heart to the rest of the world. And he certainly doesn't give me permission to close my heart to the people that are the closest to me. You see, if we open our heart, then it leads to invitation. When we get to a place where we're willing to be vulnerable, where we're willing to do what it is that God's called us to do, even when we don't understand it, and embrace people that we don't know if we're even supposed to embrace. And can I just help you? If there are people in your life that you don't even know if you're supposed to embrace them, embrace them. You see, Jesus walks through Scripture, and he doesn't say, that you will give your heart to all of these people except for those people. See, when Jesus came, he said, I died for everybody but them. When Jesus came, he died for all. Even the people that you might find the most morally repugnant people on the face of the earth. He came for them especially. Because there was a time in our life where every single one of us was like that. Open hearts lead to open invitations. You see, when we open the eyes of our hearts and we allow God to do his work in us, we won't have time to be Corinthians. We don't have time to wonder why people don't like us. We won't have time to wonder why we can't do this or why we can't do that. Because we'll be so busy making an impact in people like James and Eric and Scott's. And next week you're going to hear from the Harrises. You name them. You see, if Broken Arrow Church of the Nazarene is going to fulfill the destiny that God has for it, it will be because we open our hearts. And I'm not Paul. But I'm begging you. Begging you to open your heart to God, to each other, to me. To the rest of our community. The result of that will be revival. The result of that will be you'll have to get here early to get a seat. The result will be that we'll always be begging you for children's workers because there'll be so many kids that the result will be that you're going to see teenagers serving in a community. The result will be that when we open altars, people will flood the altars because we're actually talking to people that aren't Christians that are coming to our church, that are hungry for the gospel. But it means opening our hearts to people so that they will open their hearts to God. It's not always easy. See, it's easy for us to minister to people that we like or that we think like us. But when it comes to taking a step outside of what's normal for us, we have all kinds of preconceived notions. I got a couple of friends of mine. I call them friends now. I didn't call them friends before. They were, I can't tell you the name. I didn't get permission, but I can tell you their story. I'd met the husband of this couple several times. We in community functions and events, and every time that I met with him, I just kind of felt like he didn't really care for me. You know, we had to do a lot of stuff because my son was in school, and it was a school thing that he was a part of. And as a church, we'd buy time in the as a booster, for schools, and so we would go and we'd pay him for advertising, and I'd always be at ball games and I'd see him there, and he was always kind enough. He always smiled and those kinds of things. But whenever I was done talking with him, it was kind of like, oh man, this guy could really care less about me. But nonetheless, I didn't say, okay, I'm not going to spend any time with him. If I saw him out, I would say hello. I would call him by name, and always try to reach out to him, and eventually, every once in a while, I'll say, hey, we'd love to have you and your wife at church sometime. And he's, oh yeah, whatever, kind of thing going on. And after about 9 years of this, or 10 years of this, him and his wife walk into the front door of our church. And you could tell, they hadn't really been in church much. And you could tell that they were a little bit nervous about walking into the church, because you kind of seen that. If they're new and they just kind of walk in, and it was almost like they were testing the waters to see if God would strike them dead when they walked through the threshold. But they kind of walked in, they looked around immediately, and to be honest, when I saw them come in, I'm like, wow. I'm surprised. I thought they hated my guts. And so once I got over the shock, and I'm glad they didn't see the look on my face when they first walked in, I just kind of went over to them and said, hey, we're so glad that you're here. Glad to, what brought you here? And they're like, oh man, we're looking for a church. We don't know if this is where we're going to go. We know that we're looking for a church. Yours right across from our house. And, I've talked to you some. You're nice enough. And so we're looking. We're going to try several different churches. And I'm like, oh, hey, that's fantastic. We're glad that you're here. Shook their hand, walked away. And before I knew it, several people would come and talk to them. And so the next week, they came back, and they walked in, and I shook their hand. They were a little bit more comfortable and said, oh, man, we're so glad that you were here. And they're like, hey, thanks for contacting me last week. And then throughout that week, we had an assimilation process where people would take cookies to their home, and we would send them notes, and I would connect with them with a letter and talk to them when I had the opportunity. And so after that first week, there were so many different people that had contacted them. And then when he would see people out and about, even with his job, they were like, oh man, you were in church Sunday. I was glad to see you there. Or there were people that said, hey, I heard you were in church Sunday. That's the church that I go to. I wasn't there last week. I can't wait to see you next week. And so 1 week turned into 2 weeks, 2 weeks turned into 3 weeks, 3 weeks turned into 4 weeks, 4 weeks turned into them being part of a community group, small group. And you know what? They never got around to looking for another church. And so after they were there for a while, I said, hey, talk to me a little bit. And I admitted to him, I said, I didn't think you liked me very much. He said, well, I didn't think you liked me very much. I'm like, what do you mean? And he says, well, not you in per se, but he said, when we decided we needed to go to church, our experience with church has never been good. Because of the position that I hold, there are a lot of people in town that don't like me. And so we didn't know if we were going to be able to find a church in town to go to. And we really did plan on checking out different churches. But when we walked in that first week, and you walked up to me, you smiled, and you were thankful that I was there. When we connected with people that we hadn't probably seen in years, and they were happy that I was there. And then when we were able to be a part of a small group, and there was no such thing as a dumb question. And we were able to answer, and we were able to grow. And so we just began to talk about how God was working in he and his wife's life. And I began to watch Facebook posts change. And I got to see some pretty incredible things. And today they're members of that church. They're active in that church, and they love Jesus. Folks, that is what happens when you open your heart to people. And there are dozens, hundreds, I dare say thousands of people in Broken Arrow that are waiting for that kind of an invitation from God's people. And if we're walking with God and we're seeking after his direction, it's just natural. It's just natural to invite somebody to church if you love your church. It's just natural to be nice if you're nice. Can I just be honest with you? You can't be an ambassador or a partner of Christ if you're grumpy. It's not possible. And so as we close our time together today, and we think about the stories of Eric, and we think about the stories of James, and we think about you and the influence that you've had on people over the years. To have somebody that grows up in your church that remembers how much you loved them and continues to want to have a good relationship and to be a leader in your church is incredible. It doesn't happen that often. And so if we're going to take that step as the church, if we're really going to take seriously this idea of being in training engaged followers of Christ, like you're hearing every week, that means we have to open our hearts. Open our hearts to God. Open our hearts to each other. And open our hearts to the least of these outside the four walls of our church. We have to stop this Corinthian mindset. Here's your action step. Who have you held at arm's length? I'm not even talking about a non-Christian yet. Is there somebody in your family that you can't let them get close to you? They just irritate you to death. Is there a friend that you were once close to that for whatever reason you're not close to anymore? Is there a pastor? Is there a church member? Maybe you're good on all those fronts, and maybe there's just people that you don't quite know. I mean, you know they're going through stuff, and you want to be their friend, but you're not sure that's very Christian to be friends with non-Christians. Be their friend. Whoever it is this week, could you take a step of opening your heart to them? I'm not even telling you to ask them if they know Jesus is their Savior. You let God do all of that. All we need to do is be obedient and open our hearts to the people that we come into contact with. And God will do some incredible things.